Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, Circle of Life. Countless millions of voices chanted a song in unison, their collective din so powerful that it transformed the words beyond clear diction, while emphasizing their meaning to a spiritual level. Whatever they were saying, it was something so compelling and galvanizing that the listeners could only move to obey in a mindless trance, barely aware of their actions. That chant, that chant, that endless, repetitive drone was the first thing he became aware of as he awoke. Heavy eyelids, weak from hunger and blinded by the sun's light, refused to open more than a crack at first. The chant surrounded him, hypnotized his mind out of rational thought, and weighed down on his weary body like a magic force. Finally enough strength came to his limbs that he could feel them moving beneath his sprawled form. Though still echoing onward, he noticed the chanting had faded, its volume diminishing along with its influence blinking against the glaring light of day. He slowly took in his surroundings. Beneath his feet and all around him, stretching out in every direction, familiar forms carpeted the ground. He was slow to recognize the shapes, addled by the incessant chanting, which still echoed on at great distance, or perhaps trapped in an endless loop within his own mind, squinting, poking and prodding at the shapes under his own shadow. He struggled to remember what these things were. As memory returned, his poking ceased, his eyes widened slowly, as he stood up as tall as possible, wishing to pull away from everything around him. He was standing atop a pile of bodies, the bodies of his own people. They were everywhere. They were piled up in mounds and strewn across the earth in a thick, endless spread. Long, thin limbs stuck out at awkward angles, and blinking eyes baked in the sun's light mouths hung open or formed flat, expressionless lines. Hot, sweaty panic spiked and broke into an icy, shivering dread. There was no place to put his feet without stepping on another body. No bare patch of earth, not a single blade of grass, twisting and turning every which way. He saw the only objects that broke the field of the dead, the towers, soaring up into the sky, all hazy weakness forgotten. His mind, now shocked to a desperate sharp point, began to recall things. The tower closest to him triggered a memory. He had been there this last weekend. They all had been there alive and well, celebrating a massive gala of debauchery. The cool air of the night and light of the moon had given him a sense of excitement and purpose. During the day he laughed and bounced from one group of friends and friendly strangers to another. He made love until he was spent and gored himself until he was stuffed. He had felt alive as if for the very first time. They all had, shouting, jumping and singing. They cavorted in a display of joy and love that he had hoped would never end. What had become of all that good cheer? What terrible tragedy had reduced so many happy revelers to this lot of corpses, with no living fate to ask? The lone survivor felt his only hope was to seek out answers at the tower. Gruesome though the thought of walking across countless bodies was, he could not bear to stand in the midst of death forever, while taking pains to avoid looking down at the faces of those he tread upon. The loner trudged hurriedly toward his destination, choking back sobs of sorrow and disgust at every step. Reaching the base of the tower, he did not hesitate to begin climbing, grabbing at any crack or ledge for a handhold or place to step. Eagerly did he pull himself up and away from the sea of bodies. Searching along the width of the tower, he found nothing to answer his one burning question. Nothing but cracked, uneven walls so higher he climbed. The tower's steep side was no easy hike at times. The survivor had to pause for a rest. He woke tired and still felt entirely weak in both body and mind. At times he wondered if it was all just a terrible nightmare. What unholy twist of luck could have left him alive while so many countless others lay dead? Scanning all around the tower, higher and higher, he saw nothing, no note left behind, no living person of his ilk to speak to, no sign of life whatsoever. Looking down, he saw the vast expanse of the dead stretching out from below him. Individual bodies like little grains of sand. The height was terrific, but still he could not turn back. There was nothing down there for him. After hours of climbing, wrestling with his own exhausted body, and the grief and frustration that racked his mind, the survivor began to crack, pausing for rest. He sobbed and beat against the tower's side. Lost in his despair, he did not hear the approach of another creature, but through his tears he saw the gigantic shadow cross over him. Looking up, he gaped at the enormous monster that stood above him. Long, ugly claws wrapped across the tower's rounded side, using immeasurable strength to hold up the fat, long body of the beast. Above it, or so covered in some alien coating, a hideous, pointed head cocked to one side as it considered the survivor beneath it. Well, look at you. I had just about given up on all your kind. Most of the others died out hours ago. A booming voice, both high-pitched, yet thunderous to the diminutive loner's ears, spoke in casual familiarity, though horrifying to behold. This Pharaoh giant was the only living thing the survivor had seen since his past weekend of celebration. Blowing through his own shock and fear, he stammered agonizing question he wanted answered so badly. What had happened? WYRTH, they all dead. He trembled in the shadow of the creature as it loomed over him, studying him with carefree curiosity. What happened? Well, you all came here. You made it. And you died it. That's all quite natural. Why, you ask? Circle of life, I suppose. The monster answered happily, struck by the short, insensitive answer. The loner felt anger overtake his terror. The countless millions, once laughing, loving and singing, now lay dead. This beast had no sympathy, no interest, not even respect. It was all the spark needed to set aflame the bedraggled soul of the mourning survivor. Circle of life. What kind of ridiculous life is that? We are born into this world to know joy and excitement, make merry and find love, and in an instant it all ends. We're all struck down without warning, without reason or explanation. What cruel god or godless world would orchestrate such a life? At this the giant knocked its giant bulk in surprise, then cocked to the side again in thought beady eyes, and the sky and the carpet of dead bodies below before looking back to the tiny little thing hanging onto the tower's side in its shadow. The loner panted, furious, glaring up at the large animal, vehemently willing it to answer. Well, the monster said thoughtfully, there's no telling why some lives are longer than others, why some live and others die. That's just the way of the world. And as for who or what created all this, the great beast paused, thinking. The loner blinked, some of his anger forgotten, intently waiting for enlightenment. The bigger creature suddenly shrugged. How should I know? I'm just a bird. With just a moment for the cicada to hang his head in abject disappointment, the cardinal lunged down and plucked up the insect and ate it in a blink of his beady eyes before flying off. The second story. Someone must be home. As a child, my grandmother, Julie, would always tell me spooky stories. Most were obviously fake, but there is one that she still insists is true, even to this day, as do the others involved. As a new mother of twins, Julie lived in her sister's basement in Queens, New York. She was still out of work taking care of her newborn daughters, and would often spend her days in her makeshift apartment until someone with the ability to speak came home from work. One day, as she was putting the twins down for a nap, she heard the front door open. Someone must be home, she thought, but the door never closed. Puzzled, she climbed the creaky steps, careful not to wake her daughters. As she reached the top floor, she not only found the door closed tight, but locked and dead-bolted from the inside. "Hello?" she called out, but there was no answer. She remained alone with the twins until her sister came home. Hours later, the next day, around the same time, the door opened again, and this time she heard it close loudly. Someone definitely must be home this time, she thought, and called her sister's name up the stairs. No answer. A little unsettled, she climbed the steps once more, only to find the door locked and the house empty. This continued for days. Every day, around the same time, Julie would hear the door open and close, and as the days progressed, footsteps became audible. Day after day they would get closer to the basement, and eventually made it down the stairs into her makeshift apartment. But every day she would look and the house would be empty. She became more and more frightened as the days went by. Her sister, of course, did not believe her. After a week or so of this, she and her sister were with a few friends at the house. Julie brought up the incidents, stating that every day, around this time in fact, she would hear the door open and footsteps down the stairs. "Maybe it will happen today," she said, a little hopeful. She wanted to prove to her sister that something was happening. After a few moments of silence, there was a crash, and what sounded like someone frantically running from up the basement stairs and up to the second floor of the house. The startled women went running to see what had happened, but Julie's sister made it into the hallway first and screamed. They found her at the base of the stairs, trembling as she looked up them. "Someone's in my room," she said, horrified. The police were called, but nothing was found. All doors were still locked, all windows closed. They couldn't even figure out what caused the crash. From there, the noises stopped, but growing up in the basement, the twins would sometimes smile and wave at invisible visitors, always around the same time of day. The third story. Annabelle. Annabelle was the focus of a case that famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren took part in during the early 1970s, and is highlighted in the book The Demonologue. It has been stated that this is one of the most unusual cases of a possessed object on record. In 1970, a mother purchased an antique raggedy doll from a hobby store. The doll was a present for her daughter Donna on her birthday. Donna, at the time, was a student in college, preparing to graduate with her nursing degree, and resided in a tiny apartment with her roommate Angie, a nurse as well. Pleased with the doll, Donna placed it on her bed as a decoration and didn't give it a second thought until a few days later. Within that time, both Donna and Angie noticed that there appeared to be something very strange and creepy about the doll. The doll apparently moved on its own, relatively inappreciable movements at first, like a change in position, but with the passage of time, the movement became more noticeable. Donna and to find the doll in a completely different room from which they had left it. Sometimes the doll would be found cross-legged on the couch with its arms folded. Other times it was found upright, standing on its feet, leaning against a chair in the dining room. Several times Donna, placing the doll on the couch before leaving for work, would return home to find the doll back in her room on the bed with the door closed. One night Donna came home to find the doll had moved again. This time it was on her bed. Donna had come to find that this was typical of the doll, but somehow she knew this time it was different. Something wasn't right. A sense of fear came over her when she inspected the doll and saw what looked like blobs on the back of its hands and its chest. Seemingly from nowhere, a red liquid had appeared on the doll. Scared and desperate, Donna and Angie decided it was time to seek expert advice. Not knowing where to turn, they contacted a medium and the essence was held. Donna was then introduced to the spirit of Annabel Higgins. The medium related the story of Annabel to both Donna and Angie. Annabel was a young girl that resided on the property before the apartments were built. She was a young girl of only 7 years old when her lifeless body was found in the field upon which the apartment complex now stands. The spirit related to the medium that she felt comfort with Donna and Angie and wanted to stay with them by moving into the doll. Feeling compassion for Annabel and her story, Donna gave her permission to inhabit the doll and stay. They were to soon find out, however, that Annabel was not what she seemed. Later that week, Donna saw that the doll, Annabel, was ripped and had jagged cuts along her mouth. One night Donna awoke to some seeing like a little girl. She walked into her bathroom to see Angie dead with the words "wanna play" written in the blood of her friend. The doll was never found. Lou was friends with Donna and Angie had been with them since the day the doll arrived. He had never been fond of the doll and on several occasions warned Donna that it was evil, saying that she should get rid of it. However, Donna had developed a personal tie to the doll and decided to keep it. Despite Lou's feelings, her decision was a terrible mistake. One night Lou awoke with a jolt of terror, a jolt that didn't seem like it was from his usual nightmares. Somehow, something felt different. What would appear to be a common case of sleep paralysis became all too real. He looked around the room but couldn't discern anything out of the ordinary. At first, anyway. Looking down toward his feet, he saw the doll, and it began to slowly glide up his leg, moving over his chest and stopping at his neck. Helpless against it, the doll began to strangle him. After a moment, Lou, at the point of asphyxiation, blacked out. He awoke the next morning, certain it wasn't an ordinary night terror, and was determined to rid himself of that doll and the spirit that possessed it. Preparing for a road trip the next day, Lou and Donna were reading over maps alone in her apartment. The apartment was eerily quiet. The silence was broken when rustling sounds coming from Donna's room aroused fear that someone had broken into the apartment. Lou, determined to figure out what was causing the noise, quietly made his way to the bedroom, where he waited for the noises to stop before entering and turning on the light. The room was empty except for Annabel, who was tossed in a corner on the floor. Lou searched the room for signs of forced entry, but nothing was out of place. As he got closer to the doll, he got the distinct impression that somebody was behind him. Spinning around, Lou found that despite his unease, nobody besides himself and the doll were in the room. Then, in a flurry of motion, he found himself doubled over in pain, with blood dripping from a cut on his chest. Upon opening his shirt, there on his chest were what appeared to be 7 distinct claw marks. I hope you enjoyed this article, and should you ever want to visit the infamous Annabelle, she can be found at the Warren Occult Museum in Moodus, Connecticut. The museum is run by Lorraine Warren, the famous paranormal investigator, and now frequent guest on the television show Paranormal State. Housed in a glass case at the museum, you will find Annabelle. Mrs. Warren relates that Annabelle still moves about occasionally and is still known to make growling noises at unsuspecting visitors.